Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning, the Youth Interest Group of the CTN. It's a pleasure this morning, a great pleasure, to introduce Dr. Ken Carpenter, who's a research scientist at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, and is also director of training at CMC Foundation for Change. He's a licensed clinical psychologist in New York State and has conducted research on behavioral and pharmacological interventions for substance use disorders and the mechanisms that underlie their efficacy. Dr. Carpenter's most recent community-based work has focused on developing resources that can be utilized by parent-peer support networks to help bring evidence-informed concepts and skills to families impacted by substance use problems. And that's going to be the focus of his talk today. It's a great pleasure to turn the mic over to Dr. Carpenter. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Jose. I appreciate it. And thank you all for just taking time out of your day to spend an hour and give me the opportunity to talk about some of the work I and my colleagues have, in a sense, had the privilege to be involved in over the last 10 years or so. And I'll probably leave with more questions than answers, and just thoughts about our experiences, and try to do my best in a broad stroke to just kind of lay the land of where our travels have been. But beforehand, certainly want to thank Lisa for inviting me to be here, Jose for the introduction and the follow-ups, and some conversations with Mark Fishman, which were helpful during the summer, and Ned Nunez, who made some introductions in the beginning. So appreciate all of that, and again, just the opportunity to share some of our experiences. I'm going to jump, and this is always for me, the challenging is I jump to slides and then I lose the ability to see everybody in the way. So I will kind of jump through some slides for a bit. Hopefully the pacing is okay and enough to leave some room so I actually can learn from all of you, because I know in speaking to this SIG, I'm speaking in the context of the history of all the work you all have been doing, continue to do, and to bring your wisdom and experiences to helping families out there. And I don't want to lose sight of that. So as I talk about this work, it's just kind of how we wound up operating in a space in our collaborative efforts that hopefully in the vision is parallels all the hard work that the CTN is doing to bring these and develop treatments and frameworks and protocols for families in their journey. So I hope we can come full around to that. And okay. So hopefully that loads up and that Google is cooperative for us today. So again, I'll be talking about our collaborative efforts around community support, and particularly the idea of parents being there for other parents, and how we came into that and built on that idea. I have to say, again, I'm always a little humbled because I started my career as a clinical psychologist, directly developing treatments for those that are struggling with substance use disorders and trying to make changes in their lives. And I always knew I had a little bit of a keyhole approach, because while working with individuals directly in my office, the bigger context of their lives were a little bit remote. And it wasn't in this context we were working with families, we were doing individual work. Yet when we were speaking with people who were making changes, we would learn, particularly through their narratives, about how they wish their families could get a compass and learn ways to help support them and in a more collaborative way. So that was the exposure for me for many years of the importance of scaffolding and support. And this work actually broadened that and brought me into contact with it in a much different way. Just to say around financial disclosures, I am a salaried employee for CMC Foundation for Change. That's our not-for-profit that houses all the work that we're doing and the resources we're developing. I'm also an employee for New York State. While I may talk about some of the protocols we've developed, my colleagues, Doctors Foote and Carrie Wilkins, who formed the foundation, all the work that we put out there actually is just put right back into the foundation to support, to keep its lights on and to support the work that we're doing. So I don't have any financial stake in any of this material. I wanted to start off kind of, I don't know if it's a postscript or a prologue, but I just wanted to highlight some of the feedback we've received over the course of developing workshops and parent-peer trainings. And the things I wanted to start off by highlighting is the tone of the experience that parents had, the fact that how getting guidance on evidence-informed ideas in a setting there, they felt validated, heard, understood, and supported, how that radiates through these comments. And it's useful to see, it seems to think, and as I talk, that parents speaking to other parents was received and granted. This is quotes and qualitative data, but certainly speaks to the heart of the experience parents have being able to sit in the presence of other parents who receive some sort of training and guidance on providing supportive conversations. And why I start here and in my own kind of journeys was the contrast to what are the narratives that are often out there for parents. So if we cut back around, and I'm showing statistics that probably, are nothing new to those that are here and listening to this talk. As when I first started out in my career, this did catch me by surprise because, of course, people that are struggling would be coming to seek help, and they're going to find their way into a professional's office. And yet we know the narrative and the data suggests that individuals who are meeting criteria for substance use disorders are most probably not going to be sitting in the presence of a substance use treatment provider. And that the vast majority are out there trying to make changes, not in the context of treatment. And that invites the question, well, if they're not leaning on the professional services, who's on the front line? Who are the ones that are seeking to be the scaffolding, the supportive help that could use guidance in how to be of help? And it was captured in often would be discussions when I was working in a research clinic after we put out advertisements in subways and on radios and TVs about this free treatment that was available in the context of clinical trials. And talking to Elizabeth, who is the intake phone coordinator, that the big jump after these advertisements were not from individuals themselves, but from family members and parents. We're saying, how can I get my loved one into these programs? What advice do you have for us? What can I do? Right now, they don't want to pick up the phone. And there was not much we had to offer in that situation in that time, but saying, encouraging them to encourage their loved one to reach out for help. And we knew that was lacking. That didn't stop parents from seeking advice. Often in the work here, we would wind up, well, where are parents turning? Where are they seeking help? Where are they learning about how to navigate that? And often the narratives they were receiving were things such as, you have to be careful not to be an enabler, be careful of your codependency. The only option you have is to go to an Al-Anon meeting. You better start practicing this idea of detachment. If you don't, there'll be terrible outcomes. So not that there was a void of narratives or compasses being offered, but often what was filling that space, and parents would report to us that this is what they were receiving. this was the compass of how they can try to navigate this in their home. And often it carried the message of you're doing something wrong. You're either too lax, too strict, overly involved, not involved enough. You're failing as a parent, which just kind of weighed to the shame and stigma that parents were carrying with them as they were trying to make sense of how to go about helping their loved ones. And I'd like to highlight, because the idea of I was spoiled, I talk with colleagues and travel in circles where we have a different narrative about what can be helpful. And the assumption being that's the narrative that works its way out into the world. And yet the feedback often was, no, we never heard of things that you're talking about. And we can fast forward to even last year, a parent peer in the program I'll be talking about, who eventually went on to become director of an RCO, talked about her experience at a national conference for families around mental health and substance use problems. And these were some of the things she came back talking about, which is, even though it was a combined conference, very few talks were actually about substance use disorders. An underrepresentation, because we know how much it impacts families. Of those, there was still stigmatizing language being used. They were talking about addicts and alcoholics. And there was quite a contrast compared to how the conversations were being in the mental health talks, that these labels were not being thrown around. That for 2 of the 4 talks, the learning objectives were still around codependency and enabling. And that as a family member, her experience was that because someone in the household was struggling, there was an automatic implication that there was something wrong with the parents. And this message just was an increased weight on, in a sense, going underground and not wanting to ask for help. And again, a contrast that's not the narrative she was experiencing when she was going to mental health discussions. And she further highlighted too, again, that terms like detachment, disconnect, and letting go as being what was readily offered to her as a compass on how you should navigate this as a family member were totally absent when it came to other mental health issues that really required family to be involved in treatment. And that's not the experience when it became in the arena of substance use disorders. So while there's so much effort in changing the narrative, and certainly in the circles that I've traveled and my like-minded colleagues, what's traveling in the world still would catch my attention, because that's not the narratives that families are running into when they're first trying to figure this out. And certainly there's research to say, while we've made improvements in turning some of the culture in the substance treatment field, and certainly the CTN is fully behind trying to change the culture of treatment settings, and all the work that's even gone into family protocols, they don't make their way into many treatment experiences. And families also feel judged by healthcare providers, not listened to, and sidelined. Which leads to just a sense of hopelessness that there's nothing they can do to support their loved one. And what they are instructed to do often goes back to those earlier narratives that I highlighted. So in the backdrop of all those experiences and bringing forth these quotes certainly resonate and stand out as a much different experience that family members can have when they're interacting with individuals that have some guidance in evidence-informed concepts and skills, and can lower the bar in terms of being a little bit more welcoming, to make a more inviting circumstance for families to step into the light, to say, how can I help my child? How can I make my household provide better scaffolding for our family in dealing with this? So that's kind of where I'd like to bring the clock back to where this all started for me and my colleagues, and to say that at the time that I stepped into this arena, my colleague Jeff Foote was in consultation and talking with Tom Hedrick, who I mentioned his name. He passed away within the last several years. and was really a pinnacle and point person at that time working for the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, because he was a frontline sounding board for many of the parents who would be reaching out to the partnership, feeling lost, not knowing what to do, having no idea of how to be of help to their loved ones, if their loved ones were not involved in treatment, and also talking about how they felt their experiences with the treatment system did not really help empower them or help them to have a direction to go in. And Tom, with his colleagues over at the partnership, were developing a helpline service which parents could call for information. But he also knew there was a group of parents on a grassroots level that were more in wanting to be ambassadors because they felt that evidence-based ideas and concepts they never heard of. They were shocked to hear that there were treatment protocols that were evidence-based that could be helpful to families. It wasn't part of their experience, and they never even heard of them. So there was a real grassroots that these conversations can be different. Parents can learn that there are things out there that can be of help. So Tom and in collaborating with Jeff and the colleagues were like, how can we use this helpline as a way to offer parents not only just information, but opportunities to talk to other parents who very much wanted to give back, to have different types of conversations about alternative ways, some skills that they could think about, ways of understanding this journey that most of these parents never had. So the idea here was to build within this helpline another structure, which was kind of a coaching program, a way of parents to be able to have helpful conversations with other parents. So the intention of the program was to try to build a platform that had some national reach, that would allow and take down some barriers for parents who often were afraid to reach out, or maybe in communities that they had zero resources outside of major cities, but they could reach out and come into contact with other parents with lived experiences. A little bit of a difference here was not only the lived experience route, which we wanted to highlight as being a huge factor here, but that we could help these parents that wanted to give back to other parents a compass for helping orient parents that there are other informed skills and concepts that are out there in the world that they're not hearing about. That throwing your child out and detaching, while that is a narrative out there, and often the narrative they're hearing, that is not the only narrative. There are other ways of thinking about this. So we wanted to help inform these conversations with a compass that allowed coaches to introduce ideas and retain the importance of lived experience. So around 2013, we started out by developing a 20-hour workshop that would be over the course of a weekend and offer 12 weekly consultation conversations for parents who are acting as coaches to get continued training and discussion about how they're going about coaching. And I'll provide a little bit more detail on that program as we go along. But that's where we started. What would it be like to have a 20-hour workshop program that we're offering directly to parents who want to help other parents and orient them to different ideas and concepts that are out there, and validate that their lived experience was important? Now, I could probably have a whole talk and would love to be around coffee and talk with all of you about how we got to all these concepts. We started out with the idea that, and at Tom's, is there a way we can help parents talk about the ideas of craft in the context of conversations, community reinforcement and family training, and help them have conversations that would be informed by motivational interviewing conversational skills? That's where we started. For various reasons, we were getting feedback about what concepts are helpful. What are the ideas that families were finding useful when they put a set of lenses on? And we housed this in this idea, this model of invitation to change, which is really just housing different ideas that families were finding useful in starting their journey, which is, I have a child that's struggling. How can I see this, understand it, and what can be some things I bring into the mix as I'm going down this road? And these were the topics that are part of this particular model. What are the lenses that parents can use that can help them see the behaviors and the substance use from a different angle? That was really challenging for people because of the narratives that they would come up with and the advice they were getting from other families or their own family members. But the idea that substance use is reinforced. Behaviors make sense when you really think of it in terms of what's the reinforcement behind driving this behavior. That change can look different for different people. There's different roads into substance use and different roads out of substance use, often not the narrative that there's only one way to change and we have to force someone into that. And the critical importance of ambivalence in the process. How do you understand the back and forth of this? I thought they were motivated to change. That's what they said yesterday, and today they're talking differently. How do I recognize that and understand that as being part of the process of change? So we wanted to provide some ideas around understanding that would be useful for parents in interacting with their loved ones. Self-care was something that's always out there and talked about in different circles, but we added a little nuance to that because one thing that parents were saying is I'm being asked to leave my values at the door. That's the advice I was getting. I have to leave what's important to me and be different. That's what I'm being told. So we wanted to bring the fact in is you don't have to leave your values as a parent. How do you want to be in this relationship? Let's think about that in terms of your role. You have a choice. Let's spend some time. So these ideas of awareness, willingness, and the practice of self-compassion were our take on self-care. The self-compassion becoming more important as parents talked about the sheer brutality of their self-talk based on the shame and stigma that has gone with this journey and judgment that constantly was chatter that they experience and how they're handling this and the mistakes they feel they've made and the second guessing that they're doing. So is there a way we can offer and invite people to think about how to respond differently to that? So that was kind of the awareness that this is a long journey. Things don't change overnight. And just the helping with action tools, which again, really encompass the idea of reinforcing change, power of reinforcement for supporting the behaviors you want to support, and how to be intentional in responding to those behaviors that you don't want to support. I kind of, in my mind, blow it out in terms of what are the things you want to enable and what are the things you don't want to enable. There's different ways we can be intentional about that. And the behavioral tool is also a step away from aversive control strategies that often were where people went when they were experiencing some real challenges. Communication tools you can find and craft other treatments for sure. It's not unique to here, but how do you have dinner time conversations and conversations at the dinner table, particularly when we're no longer talking with each other? So we'd want to help talk about even things like open questions and affirmations and reflective listening and how to structure conversations to just start to change the tone of interactions. So these topics are all the evidence-informed, infused topics. I know I'm doing this in kind of a broad stroke, but these were the ideas that were resonating with parents that they never heard about, things they never even considered in how to respond to their children and have different conversations. And again, we want to point to the humanness of all this. No one's born an expert in any of this. It's practice, and can we make room for the imperfections of parenting and the learning on the fly and all the challenges that come with that? And that's okay. This is the idea of support and learning how to do it and being able to practice and get feedback around that. And critically important in all of these trainings was the importance of the lived experience. We didn't see that as a weakness. The reason why, as I talk about this coaching, parents were signing up for this is because they knew they were talking to another parent who's been there. And that by itself lowered the barrier in these conversations where parents felt they weren't going to be judged and shamed. And it was a huge pivot for them because their experience often that's not what they were experiencing when they were traveling around in the world, trying to keep the secret of what's going on in their house. So in 2013, with this idea of a 20-hour workshop, these infused, we started doing trainings across the country. We did about 38 trainings across and had about 451 parents come to these 20-hour workshops. These workshops were experiential. They brought parents together to talk about these skills, share experiences, and have opportunities to practice these skills and think about how they can be used as they were going to step into a coaching role. And they kind of happened in two ways. One, there were grassroots organizations and groups that were already there, that there are parents helping parents already. What they didn't have necessarily as a compass or content to structure these kind of support groups that were occurring in communities. So for a lot of these trainings, we were training parents that already informally were involved in support groups. And for others was bringing people together through parent ambassadors or other word of mouth. And for those trainings, sometimes it was the first time parents ever sat in a room with other parents who had been down that road. And can certainly, that could be a whole nother talk about what that experience was like for parents to sit in the presence of other parents for the first time in their lives and felt understood in a way they've never felt understood before. Extremely powerful, extremely uplifting, and it actually provided a stickiness that promoted the wisdom and the motivation that parents had to give back to promote them in this work. Of the 451 parents that we trained in our partnering with the partnership, these parents would work under the umbrella of the partnership to provide coaching in this telephone kind of coaching system that the partnership was developing. For us, just a little bit of who was coming to these trainings. Most were moms. 86% of the 451 were mothers, and that tracks with a lot of the craft studies and others that who's showing up wanting to help. It was often wives and mothers. But the importance of fathers can't be missed. And it was the dads that were coming were also in the minority, but that picked up. But a huge voice that still is needed in this space. Fathers were less likely to take that risk. And for the dads that took that risk, they were often coming there being in the minority because there weren't as many dads in these trainings. Of the parents that were coming to the trainings, about 69% they were there, their sons were struggling, the affected family member. And about at the time of these workshop trainings, 66% of the children were in recovery, although 30% were still using at the time parents came. And there was a percentage of parents coming to the workshops to be coaches that had lost a child due to their substance use. They were particularly coming because they wanted to give back to other parents who were finding themselves in the throes of this journey. Well, first question was, if you bring parents not wearing professional hats to partake in a 20-hour workshop, often the first time to learn about these, how did they experience it? Was it something that was useful to them? So I'm just showing you some of the feedback from the surveys that we did, more of, is it useful? Is it something people took away from? And the blue bars are just those that reported being very satisfied along certain experiences. So from just of a consumer satisfaction realm, an overwhelming majority found the quality of the workshop helpful. With the training materials they were being provided in terms of the ITC and the ideas and the ways we were presenting it. And they also left feeling they had an enhanced understanding of strategies and skills that could be useful for families when they're discovering that their loved one is struggling. And the important litmus test was, would you recommend your friends to this? Would you actually go on record saying you should go to this? It would be helpful. And an overwhelming majority of the parents were saying they definitely would recommend these kind of services and community-based experiences to their friends who were traveling down a similar road. So it's very encouraging and started to open up our idea that going directly in the community and providing these services on a grassroots level was something that was needed and appreciated. There's certainly the other half of this, which is not only the parents that were becoming coaches and then went on to coach. For those parents that were calling, did they find it helpful talking to parents with lived experience who were able to talk about different strategies and ideas in the context of these conversations? So I'm just showing you between 2017 and 18, in conjunction with our work with the partnership, we wanted to track parents who called the helpline and opted into this coaching program. So we had about 279 parents who called this helpline, were offered the coaching service and opted in a formal way. They were notified it wasn't therapy, it wasn't treatment. You would have the opportunity to talk to another parent who's been there about ideas and concepts and skills that could be useful. This parent had lived experience. We didn't match on the type of lived experience. There was no criteria in matching substance, but it was just a parent who's been there, and they knew that. And when they opted in, we gave them a pre-survey and a post-call survey. And I'm just going to present data on the 110 individuals we got up with. We were able to get a follow-up. Just as an asterisk, the loss to follow-up, the parents we weren't able to get post-surveys on did not differ from the parents we did on any demographic characteristics or any of the pre-assessment questions or skills we assessed. There were two differences. One, parents lost to follow-up actually engaged in less phone calls. And those that we lost to follow-up also reported engaging in a little less self-care prior to starting the coaching. What were the demographics of the parents calling this helpline, these 279 parents that opted in? Again, we see a trend here. Most were moms. They were calling about their sons. Primarily, the age of the children they were calling back, and I know from adolescents to young adults, majority were between 13 and 24. Most were still living at home and struggling. That's down at the residence. You also can notice where those calls were coming from. Were mostly from the Northeast, although we got calls, the helpline was touching across country. One of the challenges with the helpline was time zones and matching time zone conversations. A bulk of the participants in our early days were from the Northeast. We had a broader density of coaches who were in the Northeast time zones, East Coast. So as the program developed, we were able to meet some of the requests coming from the West Coast and Midwest. Most of the callers calling the helpline were primarily around marijuana use. That doesn't mean that was the only substance that was involved, but certainly that was the indexed event that had them reaching out for help when they found out their kids were involved in cannabis use. There were other substances reported. Certainly we can see percentages, and often feedback from the coaches was, I think something else is going on in their house. How can I raise that and talk just based on what parents were noticing and reporting? But what really activated parents to call was marijuana use at that time. Again, this was 2017 to 2018. Did callers did I miss a slide here? Okay. Sorry for the jumping around, everyone. I didn't want to create whiplash here. What were the callers experiencing? Well, here was the framework of the program. I said the demographics of what the callers to this helpline were bringing. The nuts and bolts of the program was that parents, if they opted into this peer network, could have a maximum of 5 one-hour phone calls with a parent coach with lived experience that could occur over an 8-week period of time. The support calls could take on any numerous topics that would involve the use of reinforcement for change, ideas around limit setting, if that's something that parents were struggling with, guidance on communication strategies, the self-awareness and self-care skills. There was some discretion in what topics seemed most applicable given the call. So it wasn't an overly structured version of this, but it was that the coaches were to orient callers to other ways of thinking about how they could bring some of these into their home and provide guidance in doing that. So in these 5 calls, now, as I show you this, just as a backdrop, on average, people engage in 4 phone calls with a coach. Our follow-up for that I'm showing you, we tried to strive for a 30-day follow-up. The median time to follow-up was about 45 days after the coaching period ended. 30% of those who had called the hotline, went through all the intake and opting into the coaching program, never connected with the coach, which always just reminds me about that display of the modal number of sessions people attend when they're in treatment. So a lot of people made an effort to connect, but didn't necessarily follow through. But for those that did and connected with the coach, on average, there was 4 calls, 4 interactions. Now, what I'm showing you here is that post-survey, it's focusing on those that reported a change between pre and post-survey. So the percentages here won't add up to 100. There were people that were engaging in some of these and reported this at a high level coming in and continued to report that after. And there are some people that reported a low level and continued to report a low level. So what you're seeing is people who reported a change. And for those that reported a change, were they changing for the improved route versus a worsening over time? So for example, 47% of the people changed around this idea of did their understanding of substance use shift? And among the ones that shifted, significantly greater amount reported improvements, having a better understanding of their child's substance use during these phone calls. 38% versus 7 reported a shift for mood in the improvement range, an increase in feeling more decisive, more hopeful about being able to respond to the struggles of their loved one, improvements in the frequency of arguments at home, and an increased sense of confidence of having some kind of compass about how they can be supportive and move towards supporting their child. Again, I bring this back to the narratives that many of the parents talked about coming to the training, which was there's nothing you can do except step away, right? Or I'm doing something wrong, yet I'm not getting on guidance on what I can start to practice. So this was encouraging that even in the context of lived experience, we can have discussions, and parents in the context of talking to other parents were at least reporting a benefit from a fairly brief set of touches and being oriented to a different way of thinking about this. It also motivated, and I don't have it here, often parents were more likely to then seek treatments that operated and offered these kind of ideas for them. They had a better idea of what it can be like to come into contact with treatment programs that offer helpful things, as opposed to some of the experiences they were having with treatment systems that were offering none of this. Not everything shifted. I don't want to paint like a miracle shift here. We knew things got improved through these light touches. Yet what we noticed wasn't shifting in a favorable way was that people were reporting changes around having more issues or expanding their discussion, helpful discussion with others. Well, there was no significant differences between those saying we were improving on that versus I was actually having less discussion. The same with useful discussions. Equitable numbers saying, you know what, at home, our specific discussions around change were becoming more useful, but that didn't happen equitably. While arguments went down, people were still trying to find the right way to have discussions about change in a more useful way. Similarly, with taking specific concrete steps in some of the behavioral strategies and trying to shift some of the collaborative efforts with families. Some people reported improvements. Some people reported this was still struggling. Things didn't necessarily get better. So we just offered a pin to put in our hats of, okay, these were 5 conversations. These were helpful, and yet there is still more work. You know, what realistically are boundary issues in the sense of what can be expectations for you know, brief kind of touches. So on a positive note, lived experience, parents would attend community workshops, spend a weekend with interacting, learning about things, were quite motivated to bring this into their work and discussions with other parents, that the lived experience was a huge way to lower the barrier for parents to seek and start to get guidance and a compass on how they can go about interacting with their loved one. And certainly the accessibility of a helpline helped particularly families that were in rural America, you know, that had no place to turn to and felt quite isolated in their experience. And we noticed there were shifts along several dimensions. And yet, okay, I apologize here. Google's acting up on me a little bit. Okay. And yet there were still ongoing asks. One of the most frequent feedback from parents was, I wish this was a longer program. We knew some things didn't shift. Those who were in the parent coaching role certainly wanted more support and guidance about how to have these conversations than just the workshop in 12 weeks. And for those parents that were doing their work outside of the helpline, the ask was, well, what can you help give us to have these kind of support services in our community? We're running groups. We have parents coming and knocking on our doors about what we could do, and we want to be able to infuse our community supports in that way. So these blue things were ways that we started to operate and think about extending programs, providing more guidance, building more supportive scaffolding and structure, and broadening the way parents can share their lived experience. So in 2021, we started to want to expand the work and the workshops we were doing outside of just a helpline, but tried to build resources to help those parents that were actually doing support groups in their communities. We wanted to build support services to train them and help them offer a longer curriculum or topic sense of meetings than just 5. Provide emphasis on how to go about providing guidance and introducing these conversations, and certainly ongoing support for group leaders. So where work and what we've been developing is a 17 experiential training workshops. It still is in the spirit of what we were doing with the helpline. That still is training individuals in these ideas and concepts that are housed in this ITC model. Offering a 12-hour training and ongoing training in the use of a group protocol, which we've developed, which is really a more in-depth compass to people who are running support groups already in their community, but we're asking, is there content you can give us to infuse the discussions we're having? So we came up with a 15-week group protocol that is really a compass and a guidance on how to have these conversations, exercises they can offer parents in their groups, videos that may be helpful to them in bringing these concepts, and ways to invite people to practice and come back and get guidance in a lived experience network on these tools. We run support meetings for group leaders to exchange their ideas and discuss issues that come up in their running groups. This is monthly, as well as practice groups where community leaders can come in and actually practice talking about the topics and get feedback from our trainers and other parents who are also community group leaders. So this kind of learning community that was asked for by parents. just an example of the group protocol, this little group leaders manual that's down there. These are the topics that would run through a 15-week group protocol, and be introduced in the context of a weekly group, and with exercises and ideas. And it highlights the same ideas of communication, behavioral strategies, values and awareness, the self-care, and again, that set of lenses of how can I come to understand the behavior of my loved one and the unevenness of their change or desire to change. So this community group protocol is where we pivoted to around 2021. And over the course of 2 years, we've trained about 200 people who were running groups or in the process of developing them, and we're able to offer them this protocol to start to pilot in their discussions. And again, some of this infrastructure was already there, and it was a way to infuse conversations that are already going. And that for me is something I'm always holding, that parents are talking to parents all the time and they're looking for guidance, and there's a huge space there. And often what the narratives are have nothing to do with any of the strategies and ideas that are embedded in evidence-based protocols. And they're quite the contrary to that. So there's still the ability to offer a different compass for parents in these groups has been helpful. And this is just a smattering of the groups that are running right now. They're peer-led groups that are incorporating that protocol. I want to make sure that Google's not leaping here. Again, I'm not presenting systematic data on this. I mean, that's one of the lifts here I can talk about as I come down and can have conversations on. But we do ask people to report and rate. And again, the feedback that I'm just showing here is in the context of a community-run group where parents are sitting with parents with lived experience. How are they finding a structured group protocol in a grassroots way? And the reports are positive. Again, lived experience can be a very helpful structure by which useful conversations are happening, both before parents seek treatment, if their loved one or their child seeks treatment, or if not, there's something they can start to think about and be oriented to in the process of trying to figure out the best way to support. But there will be always ongoing continuing asks, and not to say that we've figured all this out. Community leaders constantly want to practice how to learn about these in ways that give them more flexibility in talking about it and finding the right way to talk about these ideas. There's always an ask for more resources to support these discussions, to make it accessible, to make it make sense. My psychological language doesn't always resonate. How can I find words that bring these concepts and ideas in a way that people can absorb and hold on to and start to incorporate in their lives? The ask of different communities over the years, which have been, Spanish-speaking communities, where there are informal support groups, and what translational services are out there for helping these informal support groups start to bring in some content, as well as African American communities that we've interacted with in bringing these ideas to the discussions that are occurring in African American communities. So there's continued asks and work and thoughtfulness about how we can build and increase access to this outside of the treatment framework that exists. Just to highlight two things in terms of community group hubs, certainly a foundation is trying to bring just a resource for parents to look at. Where do these groups exist? Where can I find people that would talk to me this way? And certainly we have online just community resources that parents can look for, as well as a colleague, Cordelia Krause, who's built out a website, Helping Families Help, which is just a hub for families to find practitioners who are working with evidence-informed family therapies and treatments, as well as those who bring in these ideas around craft or ITC or others, but just it's a way to house this, because one of the things where family members don't know where to find information. They don't know where to turn. So usually they come into contact with which is front and center. And often what's in front and center does not necessarily track with the things that are being offered in evidence-based treatment protocols, or again, the shock that there are alternative ways to go about learning as a family member, how to interact with my child than some of the narratives that are out there. So just to leave on food for thought, certainly systematic evaluation outside of formal research or treatment protocols is an ongoing challenge, and certainly can be really helpful. Data collection is scary for a lot of people, even clinicians who are part of being asked to send tapes in as part of research protocols. But when you get to lay professionals and parents, there's a comfortability that takes some work. And comfortability that it's not a punitive stance here. It's a way of learning together. And issues of scalability, which is how can parents come into contact with these evidence-based ideas that are either not until they pick the right treatment center, but how can we compete with the counter narratives that are out there that totally exclude any of the work that's been done to this point to say there's a different compass for families looking for guidance here, and providing supportive scaffolding for that. And certainly helping family professionals get more comfortable with working with families, which we've noticed has been a lift. And I'm sure, again, that there's so much wisdom on that here that I can't say I can speak to having all the knowledge there. But the uptake of family protocols seems to be something that a lot of practitioners are very fearful of in the professional side of the fence. So questions, and I'll jump out of here to leave time for talk. There is some wisdom here of the parent-peer ambassadors can help change the conversation out there. They are motivated. They have so much wisdom and passion and want to be able to offer families things. And yet sometimes they're doing this in silos and always wondering if they're doing the right thing because they don't have people who have their back. So how can we help that grassroots in a way? And they're looking for professionals to be in their corner, desperately looking for professional interactions, and provides a bridge between discussions that helpful in treatments versus the narratives they're getting. Often the discussions that are going on in treatment are so foreign and have to compete with all the narratives that are entrenched with families before they even get to the door of a treatment center. They're asked and they think about things through the lens of the shame and the stigma they experience. But can we help change that a little bit? So when people are seeking help, there's more of a consistent set of lenses and approaches that they're aware of. And there's always that idea about recovery community organizations and what they're trying to develop. Yet sometimes it seems to be a whole independent lane from what the treatment world is doing and what we have to offer as treatment professionals. So how can we bridge that and share expertise in a way that can fill in a lot of the space that's out there? So I'd love to get your thoughts and wisdom, and just thank you for letting me run a fast pace through at least at this point 10-year journey and probably many more years of collaborative efforts that are needed.